level. Hello everyone. Apologies for the background noise. My name is Shreyas Deshmukh, co-founder of Asian Pathfinders, along with Pallavi Vade. We welcome you all for today's fireside chat on navigating through an ideologically divided world. We come across this topic because every day, every walk of life, we have choices, either or from many, and from which news channel we watch, or which books we read, and etc. And those things makes us what we are. But usually people are not aware about what they're thinking and what they're watching and what they're reading. But people who follow or they're studying political science or international relations, they're more aware about what they're reading or what they're watching. And it's difficult choices they face every day. And now with the social media also, what they put it on Twitter or Facebook. So that's how we come across this subject. So before heading to today's session, a little about Asian Pathfinders. So we have started this initiative in June 2020 at the beginning of the pandemic as an interdisciplinary informal open platform to reach out to scholars and experts from all the disciplines of social and pure sciences to learn from each other. And since our inception, we have organized and conducted sessions on different topics such as climate change, women empowerment, cyber, politics, geopolitics, etc. We conduct these sessions in two formats. One is fireside chats. These are 1-hour sessions held on alternate Saturdays of the month from morning 11 to 12 IST. And while the dialogue in the form of panel discussions. All our sessions are open. However, there are simple guidelines we expect that everyone should follow. It's simple that everyone should respect the views of others, respect the intellectual property, and importantly, everyone should participants should stay on mute because it reduces the noise. And we record these sessions to put it on YouTube for the wider community benefits. So you can reach out to us for suggestions and ideas through email and social media. I'm sharing the email IDs and Twitter IDs on the screen right now. Now coming to today's session, we have my old friend Ratna as a moderator. Paras is a Yale-NUS doctoral research scholar in the South Asian Studies Department at the NUS Singapore. Prior to this, he has worked as a policy researcher come consultant with several institutions such as UNSCR, ORF, Oxfam, Vision India Foundation, and JPAL. His current research deals with India's external engagement in the Indo-Pacific region, state diaspora, relations in international politics, global governance, and South Asian international relations. He has published several reputed national and international articles on different platforms such as CSI, ORF, Yale Global, Indo-Pacific Report, and etc. Thank you, Paras, for joining us today, and I'll hand it over to you for the further.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Shreyas and the organizers of the Asian Pathfinders team for having me moderate this session with esteemed leading Indian international relations scholar, Professor Shrikant Paranjpe, whom we have always followed and whose articles have also been cited in my works. So I would like to introduce Professor Shrikant Paranjpe for our wider audience to understand, to get a grasp of what we are going to discuss about it. Dr. Shrikant Paranjpe is a professor at the Department of Defense and Strategic Studies at the Savitribai Phule, Pune University. In Pune, he was a Fulbright Fellow, postdoctoral researcher at the George Washington University in the Washington, D.C., and also a visiting professor at the Colorado College in the Colorado Springs. Coming to our topic, that is navigating the ideological divide. First of all, I would like to again thank the organizers of the Asian Pathfinders for coming up with such a pertinent topic, because we all are at the receiving end of this ideological polarization that we are facing, from our office groups to our family WhatsApp groups to our daily day-to-day discourse on social media as well as different media platforms. So in fact, there is a research by few research organizations, PHEW, not FEW, which says that American level polarization has arrived in India. And there are scholars like Asutosh Varsne who are arguing that this is more of a top-bottom polarization than of a bottoms-up polarization. So in the as we progress towards the discussion, I would like to hand over the mic to Professor Shrikant Paranjpe Saab to help us guide through these different dynamics of polarization that our society and we as an individual are confronting, from be it in our professional life or be it in our day-to-day personal life. Sir, before I give mic to you, I would like to have one question as you give your introductory note on this topic. I would like to put forward one question. So just like international politics, can we as an individual have a non-aligned policy to deal with such ideological divides that we are confronting? With this, I would like to give mic to Professor Shrikant Paranjpe sir for guiding us on this topic. Thank you, sir, for having. Thank you, sir, for being here. Yeah.
Thank you, Paras. That was a good question put right at the beginning. I will try and answer that in any case. I hope you're able to hear me.
Yeah, we are able to hear you.
Yeah. Well, Shreyas and Pallavi, thank you for inviting me to this forum to share some of my thoughts on this rather intriguing topic, if you ask me, negotiating through ideologically divided world. When Shreyas spelled out that topic to me, I was wondering what really to address. And then I realized that, well, I am not going to talk about political science theories. This is not about theories. This is not a lecture in political science. So that is not the idea. I would talk of ideologies, but when I talk of ideologies, I realize that nobody really labels themselves that, look, this is my ideology and this is what I'm going to talk about or whatever. You understand ideological positions from the kind of positions taken by people on a variety of issues or on a variety of situations. So when you read the positions taken by people on a variety of issues, then you go back and say, well, this person is like to have this perspective or this worldview or that worldview, and that you would label as ideology if you want. So without going to any kind of a textbook analysis of ideology, I would really use a kind of a framework where I would argue that I'm looking at ideologies simply as worldviews of either individuals, actors, state actors, non-state actors, whatever, or certain belief systems. With an idea that whether it is individuals or groups or whatever, these worldviews or these belief systems are essentially to achieve certain goals. They can be as simple as my self-interest as an individual. They can be as complex as how do you look at society, how do you look at issues of development, how do you look at issues of welfare, how do you look at issues of welfare of the people at large, or at another level, how do you look at my national interest if you're looking at it from a state level. My argument therefore is, when you're looking at this range, I ask myself the question, how do I negotiate this? That's the kind of question about that Paras was asking. How do I negotiate these conflicting, diverse, divisive kind of perspectives which exist in the world? And I'll come to that as I go along. To put this discussion in context, and I'm putting it in a kind of a historical context, my argument would be that when you're talking of divisive or divided world, this is not something new. This is not something of the 21st century, or this is not something of that has come up over the last decade or so. No, it is something which has existed for ages together. I mean, look at it this way, and you might entirely disagree with me. At one level, if you're looking at ancient times, perhaps, at one level, it existed in the context of religious identities. Either in terms of, say, textual religions like Christianity or Islam, or religions like Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, which were essentially a way of life. But these were identities which were being spread, but these were religious beliefs, belief systems in terms of religious thing. At the point when religious systems start to merge with politics and political issues, that is where you start to talk of ideologies. Religion might be simply a way to salvage yourself, search of peace or search of individual truth or whatever. But when religion becomes prescriptive and therefore gets a political connotation, it becomes something to do with politics. That is where you suddenly talk of ideological dimensions. Ideology, therefore, is necessarily political in nature. And you're talking of that political context in terms of historical debates. Again, to quickly look at these historical contexts, before I come to the core of what I'm trying to say, we've had competing worldviews. We've had competing ideologies. Ancient times you might talk of crusades or whatever, but or you can talk of eras of imperialism. You talk of white man's burden, for example. You talk of an imperialist world. You talk of colonialism. You talk of ideology as a rationale to influence people, influence societies, influence cultures, maybe hegemonic influence, but influence, essentially. It is around that time that you suddenly start to have labels, and that is where the real problem comes in. Labeling something suddenly puts you in a kind of a box. Whether it is labels like imperialism, labels like socialism or fascism or Nazism, or you talk of liberal or neoliberal, or you talk of secular, you talk of democratic ideas, you talk of you being a rightist, a leftist, a centrist, and you talk of a Hindutva identity, you talk of an Islamic identity, you talk of a variety of things. The moment you start talking of labels, you have problems. Because then you're putting individuals, groups, states in a kind of a box. And then as an individual looking at the world, then your fear is, A, would I also be put in such a kind of a box depending upon what I speak or write? Or B, can I stay away from those boxes and still be independent in my thinking and not bother whether I'm labeled as socialist or capitalist or colonialist or leftist or rightist or whatever? That is where the problem of labeling comes in. That is where the putting of boxes comes in. But that is there. But look at how things evolved, again, in a historical context, how things evolved in this phenomenon of labeling and arguments which have come forward. Again, I'm putting it in context in that sense. Second World War, the whole argument was about free world, freeing the world from what? Nazi domination. It's a very purely ideological position. I mean, you fought an entire war, but it is an ideological position. Or during the Cold War, when you talk of free world, terminologies like democracy versus socialism or communism, if you're on the western side of the border, or imperialism versus socialism, if you're on the eastern side of the border. So the same perspective, you don't use the word capitalist, you use the word imperialist, because then you have an ideological framework to spell it out. You're defining your ideology in that sense. Or when China says, now we have, the word uses, you have become free. Chinese would not say we have become communist. Chinese would say we have become free in 1949, or they have liberated Tibet. They have not annexed Tibet. So it is liberation versus annexation. Take Afghanistan, 79. Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, Soviet intervention in Afghanistan, that is a more neutral term, non-aligned as far as said, or Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, or liberation. I mean, how you look at things, how you perceive things. These are, this is, or communism as evil, for example. You labeling something, putting a value judgment to it. All these are niceties of ideologies. Fine, you using them. But this is the historical context. Now let me come to the core issue in terms of what I really want to debate on, what I want you to question me on really. Kind of setting the stage for this contestation. At one level, look at it as political communication of your ideas, of your beliefs, of your belief systems. At another level, look at it in terms of levels of analysis, in terms of individuals, groups or non-state actors, and states. I'm not talking of international organizations because they are essentially going to be dominated by either this group of state or that group of states. But when you're looking at it from a political communication perspective, why I'm talking of political communication? Because the idea is to project your ideas, your belief systems, or ideologies in a very systematic manner to the world. There are 4 questions which I ask. Who are the communicators? Who is doing all this activity of communicating? What is communicated? The content of it. How is it communicated? The methodology of it. And to whom is it communicated? Who is the audience? Now, if you raise these 4 questions, and if you look at the levels of analysis, whether it is individual, whether it is groups, non-state actors, or whether it is states, take the first issue. Who are the communicators? At one level, the communicators would be intellectuals, the intelligentsia. Now, this includes academics, this includes influencers, this includes those who at least believe in themselves that they are likely to influence ideas in the world. What do? They take up ideas which are already in existence, and that is where you go to political theory. And that is where you go into a variety of ideas which have existed over a period of time. Or they create new ideas. If you prefer the word, they create new myths, but I'm sticking the word ideas. They systematize these ideas into certain ideological positions, give it a kind of a structure, systematize it, put it in a logical kind of framework so that, intelligentsia knows how to market things. So unless it is put in a more logical frame of reference, it will not get marketed, it will not get sold. But that is what the intelligentsia would do. Then you have non-state actors, then you have state actors. What do? They select these ideas or ideologies which are available in the market, provided by the intelligentsia. And once they selected them, then they market them as their perspectives, or they market them because they believe in those ideas or ideologies. Purpose is that essentially the struggle is to dominate or influence the public opinion with your worldview, your perspectives. So you are packaging those ideas very well. Ideas have been, you write an article in some newspaper, you write an article in some journal. You present a kind of a perspective. I'll not use the word ideological, but you present a kind of a perspective. So I, as a group, voluntary organization, maybe NGO, maybe non-state, any non-state actor, or I as a state, pick that up, package it very well, and then circulate it as something in which I believe and something in which I want to project, and therefore I am doing it. Who helps them? Spin doctors help them. Spin doctors is a word of political communication, journalism. Spin doctors help them. This is essentially a political kind of activity. Spin doctors usually are associated with politicians, political groups, political parties, who know how to market these ideas in a very nicely postured kind of how to market them essentially. Spin doctors, along with journalists, along with academia, along with the intelligentsia, along with politicians, all of them essentially circulate them. It is around that point that you start to talk in terms of schools of thought. That this is now, since this is the kind of a thing which has evolved, it is a school of thought. This is how we believe. And then people like you, me, somebody else joins that school of thought and says, yes, I believe in this school of thought as against that school of thought, and I belong to this school of thought, and I do it. This is the who part of it. And I'll give you one or two illustrations in this. Take an old illustration of McCarthyism in the United States. You created a whole image of communism as evil, systematically marketed it in the United States. In China, Chinese had an excellent relationship with the United States during the Second World War. Around the time of the Korean War, once the Chinese had to fight the United States, the whole perspective starts to change, and you suddenly argue that now follow the Soviets. We live in an imperialist world dominated by imperialism. And then you lean to one side, as the Chinese would say, lean to the Soviet side. You talk of the world divided between the imperialist camp and the socialist camp. Or a very modern example, Ukrainian president. Look at him as one of the best political communicator of the recent times. He knows how to appeal, to whom to appeal. Shame diplomacy. This is the word which is now coming up. You are shaming people into supporting him. Look at and I'll come to that. What is our audience? His audience is not the presidents and prime ministers of the Western world. His audience is the people. Who are your targets? But I'll come to that in a moment. Second is, what are you communicating? As that the first question is who is communicating. Second is, what is being communicated? What is being communicated are ideas. What is being communicated are arguments. What is being communicated are positions on a variety of issues. Take again the current case. Make the world safe for democracy, for representativeness. Therefore, the need to expand NATO. Eastern European, Central European countries are coming out of the domination of the Soviet Union post 1991. Therefore, partnership for peace. President Clinton. And therefore, we want to expand this idea of a democratic world, and therefore you want to have spreading of NATO to bring in this concept of philosophy of democracy. Spread NATO to spread freedom. And then there are different perspectives. Russia annexed Crimea is a perspective. On the other hand, Russian argument would be that, look, this is the right to self-determination, which is an accepted phenomena in Europe. After all, and understand the Russian logic. The entire period between 1989 and 1991 focused on this whole issue of right to self-determination based on ethnic nationalism. And it is on that issue that became the rationale for creation of new states in the post-1991 period or around that period. Czechoslovakian splitting up, Yugoslavian disintegration, German unification, Soviet disintegration, all that is rationalized by the concept of ethnic nationalism based right to self-determination and therefore rationale for creation of new states. That is precisely the rationale which Russia is using for Crimea. That is precisely the rationale which Russia is using for the Donbas region, where there are Russian majority, there's a Russian majority population. They have a right to self-determination. You granted right to self-determination and therefore Ukraine became independent. Therefore, so many other countries of the regions of the former Soviet Union became independent. Now you have to grant the same right to the Russians vis-a-vis Crimea. But then these are two competing ideas. One idea is right to self-determination, which until 1991, 92 was a very accepted phenomenon. On the other hand, there is another idea which is freedom and democracy. We need to spread that. Again, let me factor in something else here. What ideas? See, around 92, 93, in the context of Yugoslavia, in the context of Bosnia-Herzegovina, suddenly there is a shift in terms of rationale for right to self-determination, and the Western countries start to argue that the limits for self-determination and the creation of new states comes from human rights. On the basis of human rights violations because of ethnic cleansing, labeling in Serbia, in Bosnia-Herzegovina, in Sarajevo, and therefore human rights suddenly takes the front seat, say that is the limitation for independent states based on right to self-determination. So now when you're debating Donbas, when you're debating what the eastern provinces of Ukraine are, or Crimea, the logic is not right to self-determination, the logic is human rights. That is what is being marketed now. So how ideas can be picked up and generated, how ideas can be projected is something that is, I'll give you some other examples. Or let me add. In terms of examples, more closer in terms of India. If you want to project the idea of human rights in the context of India and take a position, an ideological position, the Western position on human rights in terms of an ideological position is focusing on political and civil rights and liberties. That is priority number one. The Indian, and incidentally the Chinese also, the Indian position on human rights is not priority number one being civil and political rights and liberties. It is food, shelter, clothing, education, and health as priorities. Political and civil liberties come later on. But the projection in terms of how state actors and non-state actors, in terms of what is being communicated, in terms of ideas, in terms of arguments, whether it is amnesty, whether it is union of civil liberties, etc., the focus is on political and civil liberties because that is marketable. Focus is not on food, shelter, clothing, education, and health because that is marketable, that is what sells. And that is an ideological position taken from a Western perspective You might label it liberal, you might label it capitalist, you might label it imperialist, whatever. But I'm not concerned about labels, but this is how it impacts. I'll give you another example. How perspectives are presented. Take comparison of two major tragic incidents in India. Delhi riots 1984 and Gujarat riots. Delhi riots, the position taken by the Indian political system is it was a law and order issue. That is how it is presented. It was a law and order. It is a riot. It is a law and order issue. Position taken on Gujarat is it is ethnic cleansing. It is genocide. Now, having said this, look at the numbers, official numbers. Now, I'm not saying believe in those official numbers. Official numbers would always be problematic. Fine. You may believe it, you may not believe it. But official numbers given by the Congress government in the parliament, which is why I'm using them, not by the BJP, not by anybody else, given by the Congress government in parliament are Delhi riots, 2,146 killed in Delhi, 2,146 killed in Delhi, 586 outside of Delhi. In Gujarat, again, official figures given by the Congress government, 254 Hindus killed, 790 Muslims killed. Now look at labels. Law and order in case of 1984, ethnic cleansing in case of Gujarat. Then you go back and see what is your ideological perspective on the basis of which you're presenting this. Take still another example, very current. Ban on beef eating, ban on non-veg during a particular time of period. What I eat is my business. The moment you put religious connotations to a political decision, and it is a political decision, there is an ideological blinder to it. I'm not questioning good or bad or whatever. No, I'm saying these are ideological dimensions which one has to tackle. Now, the next situation. How is this done? You know, I've put 3 or 4 questions in terms of who are the communicators, what is communicated, how is it communicated. At an individual level, this is done in terms of projecting individual identities. You project your identity as a state, you project your identity as a non-state actor, you project your identity as an individual. You market it. And these are ideological positions which are projected. Therefore, you have leaders being labeled in a particular manner. You have a Nehru who is identified with a particular image. You have a Vajpayee who is identified with a particular image. You have Indira Gandhi identified with a particular image. You have Modi identified with a particular image. That branding is something which is done. Spin doctors do it. That branding is done very deliberately because they represent certain ideological positions taken by that person. And therefore, when you say that, look, I follow Nehru Gandhi, there is an ideological position. When you say I follow Vajpayee, there's an ideological position. When you say I follow Modi, there's an ideological position. Or I'm following an RSS, there's an ideological position. These are ideological positions taken in this whole phenomenon. Non-state actors do the same. They take ideological positions and they mark. I'll give you another example in this context. Non-state actors. Narmada Bachao Andolan. I support that. I support the whole movement. Support the movement essentially in terms not of high dams and low dams. Support the movement in terms of what has to be done for rehabilitation of those who have been displaced. That, unfortunately, was not a priority in terms of addressing. But my argument would be that that is the real human dimension that should have been focused on, rehabilitation. There was an excellent dialogue that took place in Pune University, and this is available on the net also, where one of the key persons of the movement was asked, how is it that there are no tribals in your entire leadership of this Narmada movement? The answer given by that leader was, well, we are all tribals. And the counter answer to it is no, that is not the issue. What happened really was the movement appeared to be taken over, and those who were the real original fighters in terms of Narmada, they were forgotten. It is almost like a corporate takeover, whether it is Arundhati Roy or whether it is somebody else. This is the perspective that you're projecting. It is this that you're that you're going to address. Essentially, why I'm arguing all of this is because essentially there are no absolute truths anywhere. Everything is relative. And this is one example which I keep giving. Shreyas is smiling, probably remembers that example which I gave in the class. Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, identified as a separatist leader by Pakistan. Because Bangladesh became independent and therefore Sheikh Mujibur Rahman became successful, he eventually became a freedom fighter. So where you are located will determine whether you are a freedom fighter or you are a separatist or a terrorist or whatever. Indian national movement, some of the earlier fighters of the Indian national movement were classified as terrorists by the British. They became freedom fighters post-independence, but the logic is the same. Perspectives depend upon where you are located. Now, in all of this, I'm tempted to give one more example before I go ahead. You know, when the CTBT discussion was, since so many of you belong to international relations, CTBT discussion was at its height in Geneva, in that conference on disarmament. A glossy pamphlet booklet was circulated all through India to almost all departments in India, to a variety of faculty members. I also got one, written by Praful Bidwai and Achin Vinayak, very strongly arguing why India should sign the CTBT. The booklet was prepared courtesy an organization, a European organization, and circulated free of cost. I mean, it must have cost quite a bit to prepare it, circulate it, print it, or whatever. We are marketing that idea. And there I come to the last question. Who is your audience? To whom are you marketing it? And that is important. See, at one level, you're marketing to your domestic audience, you're also marketing to the world at large. But you have to choose your audience. You have to choose your audience and you have to project accordingly, because only then you will have followers. See, it is not an accident that you have dedicated readership for a Times of India, for an Indian Express, for a Hindu, for a Statesman, for a Hindustan Times. And if I am reading Hindustan Times, I would not read Statesman. If I am reading Times of India, I would not read Indian Express by choice. I mean, the dedicated readership is a representation of your audience. Who is your audience? The newspaper caters to that audience. If you look at if you look at all these newspapers together and you look at the positions taken by these newspapers, you will realize that positions are bound to be different. And these positions are different basically because they have a dedicated audience. And EPW has an audience, mainstream has an audience, academic journals have audiences. Each journal, and whether it is an academic journal, whether it is a newspaper, whether it is, or now internet, social networking, whether it is WhatsApp or Twitter or whatever, or YouTube, you have to create an audience. And once you create an audience, you have to sell your ideas to that audience in a more systematic manner. And that is where you are able to generate. And then you say, I have so many thousand followers. But remember, those followers are only those who like your ideas. You don't have counter followers. You don't have followers from the other group which is following some other idea. So how it is communicated? It is communicated very systematically in terms of who this thing is. That is where the audience comes in. Now, in all of this, let me come to the last issue, which is based on the question which Paras asked. What do I do in all of this? To be very honest, this is a very genuine question. And there is no logical, there is no academic answer to that. But let me talk a little on the basis of my experience. I have by and large tried to ignore either the left or the right or the center or whatever perspectives. And by and large, I have been writing, whether it is in the media or whether it is in the academic journals, irrespective of what the position that publication is taking. I write in Marathi a lot. And in Marathi, there are three important newspapers, Lok Satta, Maharashtra Times and Sakal. Each have their own perspectives. But I write in all three of them. And I'm very clear, this is what my position is. Fortunately, none of it is edited by any of the editor. Probably because whatever I've argued is logical or whatever, and that is accepted. To give you a very concrete example, there were two books by a French author by the name Thierry Mason on 9/11. One describing the New York tragedy, the other the Pentagon tragedy. And the whole theme of the two books was that this entire thing was a kind of a phenomenon manufactured by the United States itself. What went into Pentagon was not an aircraft, but it was a missile which the Americans themselves shot into Pentagon and so on and so forth. This is an American created kind of a phenomenon. And academic book, very well written with all kinds of footnotes. There was an article written on this, and the editor said that this is the perspective. Do you have a counter perspective? So he gave me those two books. I wrote about it. The central argument was this, and this is a problem with almost all doctoral theses or research articles. You have a perspective. This is what you have in mind. In your methodological terminology, you call it a hypothesis. But this is what you have in mind. And then you select footnotes and endnotes or whatever you select material which is convenient to that analysis. And you write an entirely logical argument saying that this is what is true. This is what happens in the context of much of the writings on Kashmir today in the context of India. The moment you start doing that there is a predetermined kind of a position that you take and you select material only which is convenient to you. It is a very well-researched book, research project, fine. But there is an ideological bias to it because you have started with that perspective. In fact, that is where the problem is, that most of the think tanks, most of the non-state actors have this perspective in mind. This is their, you call it an agenda perhaps, and then you are marketing it. How do you negotiate it? You negotiate it by saying that, well, this is my position, publish it or not, but don't publish it. How does it really matter? But eventually you'll find if you're writing it logically, you will get it published. You will have, see, when I was on a Fulbright, I was working on the American Indo-US nuclear issues. And I had written a specific chapter on the Tarapur atomic power deal, how Americans decided to stop fuel there, etc., etc. A very well noted American scholar to whom I had given that manuscript to read, his first question was, why are you raking this up now? It was inconvenient at a time when I was writing. I said, I'm not raking it up. I'm only documenting what is there based on the material which you have given me from the Library of Congress. So, but that is how it is. If you are able to project it in a as objective manner as possible, I know that none of us can be really objective. We have our worldviews, we have our mindsets. Accept that. And if within that framework, write about it. Write whatever you have. Eventually, you'll get accepted. I have been time and again labeled once as a pro-Hindutva, once as I used to give a lot of lectures I gave a lot of lectures for the Congress party at the time of that Indo-US nuclear deal, telling the people how that deal is good and that is done. So the BJP criticized me, you're talking to the Congress saying this deal is there. I gave a lot of lectures to some communist groups on a variety of issues, and they said, yeah, apna aadmi hai. So labeling is bound to be there, accepted. Perhaps you have to be thick-skinned, whatever. Perhaps you have to be thick-skinned. I think I've taken a lot of time. I'll stop there, and I'm open for criticisms, questions, whatever.
Thanks a lot, sir, for your really insightful topic. It's been long that I felt like I was in a lecture. Thanks again for this. So, based on some of your arguments, so we see there are a lot of talk going on about idea of India. People saying that BJP's stance in Kashmir is in a way betraying the idea of India that was projected by Nehru. So I just wanted to ask you a question. What is this idea of India, and is it representative? So, for example, the idea of India which they are arguing is an idea of India that was formed in 1947, 50s, or even 60s. And we all know that Indian polity was not much representative at that point of time. People did not have access to devices of telecommunications, nor were there people from marginal caste in parliament. It was mostly an elite-dominated political system, academia, bureaucracy. Compared to that, the idea of India that is being projected now, or that we are told that is being projected now, seems to be more representative. We have more representative parliament where we have people from marginal backgrounds being in MP. Similarly, academia too has become comparatively more representative. Media, there are avenues of media, so people cannot strangulate a particular point of view. So do you think, what is the idea of India? And if it is based on representative, if it is a function of being representativeness, don't you think the idea of being projected in contemporary India is more representative than what is being defended in the past? That was in the past. Yeah, this is first question. I think I will list down 2-3 questions at a go, and then you can deal with one of them. Yeah. Second question is I picked up from a chat where it again says he says about Gandhi Savarkar divide that we see or that has become a mainstream discourse in our that dominates our politics today. So the question that was put, that can we synthesize both Gandhi and Savarkar and move forward? And I would like to add to it is that ironically the BJP RSS, the cultural politics of BJP RSS, don't you think it more Gandhian in nature than Savarkarian? So when they say meat ban, Savarkar was not, I don't think was supportive of meat ban. So don't you think this contradiction that exists there in terms of cultural politics, or can Savarkar today would have found himself comfortable in BJP RSS? And does it also requires a multiple interpretation of Savarkar rather than blaming, rather than labeling him as a Hindutva forces or etc.? Because I think he was more modernizer than Gandhi in different social norms. Third question that I would like to put to you is what different groups advocate? Is it a convenience of where they are located in terms of their political power they have? So, for example, left ideologies when it started, the left was about community rights or states intervention, while right was about individual freedom and market. But if we see the debates that are happening now, so for example, meat ban or burqa ban, etc., is constraining of individual rights, which is advocated by right groups, while left is championing more of an individual rights. So is it a function of where we are located in terms of power hierarchy? The idea which we advocate is the function of where we are advocated in terms of power hierarchy. Yeah, so this is the third question that I would like to you to reflect upon. Thank you.
Okay, let me go one by one.
Sure.
The last question in terms of when you articulate something, is it based on where you're located or is it convenience? The classic illustration would be the CPM when it was in power in West Bengal. CPM was entirely against foreign investments in India, and it opposed foreign direct investment in India when it came to arguments in the parliament. But the same government went out of the way to invite foreign investments in West Bengal because their argument was that that is what would modernize or develop West Bengal. So it is more a kind of a convenience. It is more a kind of a where you stand. It is more in terms of what kind of response do you expect from the people? Who is your clientele? And you're willing to modify your positions according to clientele. It is politics. I am not blaming CPM for that. It is politics. Every political party would do that. In terms of the positions a BJP or a Congress might take in the center, it might take in the state. NCP takes a particular position at one point, or BJP takes a particular position at one point. They would differ from state to state, region to region. I would not blame the CPM or any political party. That is, if it is electoral politics, they're fighting for electoral politics, and it is convenience in terms of where it is located. Idea of India, and then I'll come to Savarkar. Idea of India, by and large, this is a bad word to use. What is marketed in terms of idea of India is that people would ask you to read Discovery of India, Jawaharlal Nehru. An excellent book, excellent presentation in terms of the whole view of India. But that is not really the only manner in which one would depict understanding India. But I'll also give you a small side remark. Just as there's a chapter on unity and diversity in terms of understanding India, there is also a small section which says Mother India, Bharat Mata. I have talked to n number of people who have argued that whenever I said that, have you read that section on Bharat Mata in Discovery of India? And by and large, the reaction was, how can a Nehru's work contain the concept of Bharat Mata? Because it goes against the whole tenor of what Pandit Nehru stood for, apparently. But that is where it talks of the perspective of an India where an average Indian looks at India as Mother India. If you're looking at imagining India, the theoretical position placed by Nehru in terms of unity and diversity is probably the best position that you can ever understand. Having said that, it was never implemented in India. There has always been the concept of mainstream, which essentially means that everybody has to sink into that whole mainstream and become an Indian. And mainstream was essentially India north of Narmada. This argument when you're looking at India, and that is a debate which is now going on. What really is India? Is it a multitude of these regions across with their own identities, as Nehru would say it, and therefore unity in diversity? Well, yes, at one level, yes. That you have, I personally prefer the word pluralism to secularism, because pluralism is more encompassing. It includes not only religion, it includes ethnic differences, regional differences, linguistic differences, and so on and so forth. But my argument is, yes, you do have these identities, multiple identities. But having said that, over and above these multiple identities, if you go back into history, right from ancient India, there is a sense of what is Indian. Not in a modern nation-state system as that Westphalian system will tell you. You're not talking of a modern India in a nation-state centric Western terminology. You're talking of understanding India as a civilizational state which existed right from Hindu Kush to Arakan Mountains, south of Himalayas. It would include modern day Pakistan in it. That is a sense of being Indian. And this is a civilizational concept of India. This is not a nation-state concept of India. The moment you talk of a unified state in the context of nation state, then you might talk of an Ashokan empire, you might talk of a Mughal empire, you might talk of a Maratha empire, and so on and so forth. And so that is when you had unity in terms of this thing. But the real thing is, if you have to really understand India from imagining India, understand it as a civilization state. Don't understand it simply, don't look at it simply as nation state and therefore states and their identities, etc. That is how I would look at it. At the same time, what you said in terms of being more representative, perhaps I would rather use the word participative government rather than representative, where the whole idea of participative would be that a lot of marginal groups who otherwise would not be able to come into the policy making or decision making circles because of their being either spread out or being marginal are accommodated in public policy making. So I would use the word participative government rather than representative. You find more participative systems in terms of governance. Gandhi and Savarkar. Yes, Savarkar was, what little I've read of Savarkar. I was in a department where we had a Savarkar chair. What little I've read of Savarkar, and I'm not a Savarkar scholar, let me be very clear. Unfortunately, Savarkar has been labeled as a Hindutva ideologue, which, if you read Savarkar more carefully, it is not so. He was a modernist. He was against the caste system. He was the one who was talking. Only two persons in India talked of the importance of Indian Ocean. We talk of K.M. Panikkar. We also should talk of Savarkar. He is the one who talked of importance of the Indian Ocean, especially Andaman Nicobar and whatnot. But in terms of cultural politics, BJP, talking of more meat ban and whatnot, as I said earlier, personally, it does not make sense to me. But that is my personal opinion. In terms of cultural identities or cultural politics, again, political parties are bound to take positions which are marketable, saleable, electorally profitable. If BJP takes a particular position, Congress may or may not take it depending upon how it finds it. A Shiv Sena may or may not take it depending upon how it finds it. So political convenience is something different. And I don't blame political parties for that. If they are playing electoral politics, they're playing electoral politics. Well, let them play electoral politics. That is how I would look at it.
Thank you, sir. I think I know we have reached our time limit, but with your permission, if it's fine, I think there are a few questions there. So I have summarized some of them into one question, and then I would like to just pose a last question to you before we conclude this. So there's this talk going on, since you also brought the idea of how we look India in terms of civilization. So there's this question also: is Asian states different from Asian states, or is Asian identity different as Western identity? So to put both strands together, I think we have scholars who are arguing in terms of non-Western IR frameworks, non-Western international relations, arguing that states such as India or even China have share different experiences, and they have a different way to look to the world, and therefore the bill of these rising powers. So, but my argument is that these rising powers, no matter how they identify themselves, be it China or be it India, they are continuously, as they are rising, they are more or less embarking on the same path of, you say, homogeneous idea of a state where we have one nation, one election, this kind of sloganeering. Similarly, nationalism that we are increasingly seeing is also more aggrandizing nationalism, which is again a characteristic of West. So is it something different that we are seeing in terms of how these rising power project their identity and the actions they undertake? Is there a discrepancy between them, or they identify themselves as non-Western? Their actions are more West oriented to what fits the definition of a characteristic Westphalian Western nationalism. So yeah.
Thank you. Let me put it this way. There has been a lot of argument in this essentially Chinese origin, and it has now been spread, that when you talk of a rule-based international order, we are willing to follow a rule-based international order, but unfortunately, the rule-based international order has essentially been a Western imposed rule-based international order, and therefore you need to have a review, a relook at that whole concept of rule-based, or what the rules, conventions, etc. are. And that is what has been the main Chinese argument over the last several years. The moment you accept that argument, what you're saying is that there are certain managers of the world order, and these managers of the world order are likely to decide what really constitutes rule-based order. This is precisely what the debate would be in terms of Ukraine, in terms of what the Western position on Ukraine is and what the Russian position on Ukraine is, and Chinese position, etc. Even the Indian position on Ukraine. That rule-based order, yes, but who is defining what rules? And that is a question which is likely to be asked. When rising powers, whether it is India, whether it is China, whether it is any other country, are questioning these rule-based orders, unfortunately, the argument is still caught up in the same nation-state centric framework which has been used by the Western countries over a period of years. If you use the nation-state centric framework, then logically you go within the same paradigm of an argument, saying that yes, there are rules, there are conventions, then there's an organization, you talk of world order, you don't talk of anarchic international relations, you talk of an order-based international relations based on conventions, rules, legalities or agreements and so on and so forth. In that, then you are at a disadvantage. See, when India used to argue throughout 1940s, 1950s, that we are a revisionist power, and that concept of revisionism was expressed either in the context of new international economic order or in the context of non-alignment or whatever, or even in the context of a nuclear test of 1974. When you're arguing that we are a revisionist power, we are trying to revise this order, which is essentially dominated by the Big Five or Big Seven or Big Eight or whatever, G7 or G8 or whatever. The moment you argue that, and the moment you accept nation-state systems, then you are caught up in the web of nationalism. You talked of nationalism. See, increasingly, whether it is the Western countries, whether it is the United States or Canada or United Kingdom or whatever, or India or China, increasingly we are becoming more and more nationalist in character, and assertion of nationalism is being seen. And we are arguing that we need to be revisionist, change this international order, basically because it is not in my national interest. At one time, when India was talking of revisionism, it was not on nationalist or national interest perspective. It was saying that the world has to be understood as a society of states, not as a state of anarchy. That old logic of the world being understood as a society of states now does not exist. Now it is essentially my national interest and my nationalism being pitted against this rule-based world order. But everybody is becoming more nationalist. Everybody is becoming more and more aggressively nationalist. And that is what we have to deal with. So in that sense, we are caught up. And there are no clear-cut answers to this.
So actually, I'm just tempted to ask one last question.
Sure,
I'm sorry for, actually, it's a very good, I think it is prompted in chat. So it says that since we all are becoming increasingly nationalistic, does it mean that we can, so for example, if you take Asian nations, does it mean that we cannot come together and argue as a common bloc, as was conceived, say, 10 years or 15 years back down the line, that rise of an Asian century? But we see that Asian century seems to have floundered because China essentially wants it to be a Chinese century rather than Asian century, and we are in the logarithms in Ladakh and at different forums. So does increasing nationalism means that we will have less common ground to converge as rising powers in Asia?
Good question. As I would see it, the common ground would be specifically sectional or specific issue wise. It can be on trade, it can be on climate, it can be on something else. If you're talking an Asian century and therefore an Asian identity, I doubt, because that is where national interests will clash. But take ASEAN, for example. ASEAN, its predominant common ground remains trade in terms of the way in which they're, or take European Union. Their entire common ground is essentially economics and trade and economic integration. The moment you have issues like Ukraine coming in, there's a difference between what the Polish want, there's a difference between what the Germans want, or the French want. The British are out now in any case, but their nationalism takes over. So if at all you're talking of an Asian century or whatever, a coming together of countries, it would be sectoral. It would be on specific areas where cooperation can be made possible. Not beyond that. You don't have a blanket kind of, I don't see a blanket kind of a coming together. But again, my perspective.
Thank you very much for this insightful session. And I know we extended time quite a bit. And even though there are more questions, but yeah, I think we would like to pause for a while now. To thank you, Professor Shrikant Paranjpe for joining us, and also the organizers of Asian Pathfinders for having and organizing this session and conceptualizing the theme, which kind of drifted from personal politics to domestic politics to international politics, and an all-encompassing theme. Thank you, Shreyas. Thank you, Pallavi. Thank you, Professor Shrikant Paranjpe again, and thanks to all the audience for putting brilliant questions in the chat box. I think Shreyas wants to
let me interrupt and let me thank Shreyas and Pallavi and you, Paras, for conducting this and giving me a chance to spell out some of my ideas or idiosyncrasies. And on this film, let me also thank some of the questions which have been coming out. They're really good. They are provocative. They make you think. But thank you once again. Shreyas, your
this fear like brought out this particular question: how to navigate in ideologically divided world. So I think so you have really put nice arguments, and I think we keep going through your lecture again and again on YouTube whenever we will find ourselves in this position, how to think and how to go about, how to be objective while writing papers or choosing something from either or, if it is right or wrong or good or bad, something like that. But I think that was the reason behind today's session, sir. So I think thank you, sir. Thank you so much for taking your time out, particularly on Saturday, and sharing your thoughts on this subject. And thank you so much, Paras, for joining us today morning.
Thank you.
Really good
Thank you,
moderation
Shreyas, for
and
having
good
me.
questions from your side also. And thank you our audience also who joined today and put forward those important questions as sir said. Those are thought-provoking questions, and we are going to put this session on YouTube. So we will share further on our social media channels. Thank you so much and have a great day ahead. Take care.
Thanks a
Thank you.
lot.
Thank you, sir.